Usually, when we talk about a society, we tend to think of it kind of like a building, you know?
Right, like laying a foundation and going from there.
Exactly. You lay the foundation, you put up the walls, you slap on some paint, and boom, you have a nation.
It is a very comforting way to look at things, honestly.
Oh, totally comforting.
Yeah.
I mean, you can point to the zoning permits. You can clearly see who built what, when they built it, and who owns the deed.
Yeah, we really like our history and our culture to be highly visible.
We do. We like things to be perfectly categorized with neat little labels.
Mm.
But what if that blueprint is just a complete lie?
Well, that is the exact premise we are digging into today.
Right. What if the categories we use to define ourselves are so new-like, so unimaginably recent, that they completely miss the reality of what human beings actually are?
And that brings us to the source material for today's deep dive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Today, we are decoding this staggering, and I mean really dense, essay titled Zera and the State, the Sovereignty of Source.
It is a remarkable piece of writing. I mean, the scope alone is just breathtaking.
It really is. And it makes this one explosive claim that we are going to spend this entire deep dive unpacking.
Right. The claim that you cannot steal a culture and the state has absolutely no power to create life.
Which is a huge statement. But before we jump into the deep end, we need to lay down some ground rules for you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
Because this source material, it does not pull its punches. It touches on some highly charged, incredibly sensitive political and cultural themes.
We are talking race, gender, protected classes, colonization, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. Which is why we need to state this explicitly right up front. Neither of us is taking a side here.
Not at all. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the conclusions of this author.
No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, our role today is strictly to act as your guides.
Right. We are just here to decode the complex arguments, the historical claims, and the deeply metaphysical logic that is contained within this text.
The goal is simply for you to understand what the author is arguing and, the mechanisms behind why they are arguing it. You are going to evaluate the merit of these ideas entirely for yourself.
So, keeping that impartial lens in mind, where does the author actually begin?
Well, we start with a sentence that essentially throws down a gauntlet right on page 1. The author writes, quote, "I am migrated, not appropriated."
That is a very heavy opener.
Right. And to explain this, the text completely bypasses modern history. It just drags us all the way back to the literal dawn of humanity.
Yeah, the author asks us to zoom out to a scale that makes our current political debates look, well, microscopic.
Because the modern person is so deeply conditioned to think in present-day categories, right? Like white, black, indigenous, European, African, colonizer.
But the text argues that humanity is vastly older than those modern checkboxes.
Right, like Homo sapiens evolved in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago.
300,000. And the text emphasizes that contemporary Eurasians trace most of their ancestry to a population that dispersed out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago.
Around 50,000 years ago, right?
Exactly. And that was following even earlier dispersals.
So, I mean, just think about the scale of that time for a second. 50,000 years.
It's almost impossible to conceptualize.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
If you call someone European or Asian, the text argues you are treating a very, very recent layover as if it's an eternal beginning.
Right. It's just a late-stage label stamped onto an ancient ongoing journey. The phrase the author actually uses is, "the receipt is longer than the label."
I love that phrase. The receipt is longer than the label.
That concept of the receipt is foundational to the author's whole premise here.
Because a person might be European by recent ancestry or, American by current address. But the deeper biological receipt is an African origin, a massive Eurasian route, and an American location.
Right. So when the author says, "I migrated, not appropriated," they are claiming that their existence in a new place is the result of deep-time human movement.
It's not a sudden, malicious insertion into someone else's history.
Exactly. And the text applies this exact same logic to human culture.
Which completely upends how we usually talk about culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we tend to talk about culture as if it was invented, like yesterday, by whichever group currently claims it online.
But the text brings up a specific archaeological site to prove how ancient culture actually is.
Yes. Lombos Cave in South Africa.
Right. We are talking about artifacts found there dating back 75,000 to 100,000 years.
Let's look closely at what was actually found in that cave, because the physical reality of it really matters for the argument here.
So, archaeologists found pieces of ochre in Blombo's cave.
And ochre is like a natural clay earth pigment, right?
Correct. But these weren't just raw stones sitting in the dirt, they were deliberately engraved. Early humans intentionally carved complex geometric cross-hatching patterns into the rock.
Wait, so if we find cross-hatched ochre from 100,000 years ago, well, that completely destroys the timeline of modern political labels.
That is precisely the author's point.
Because you don't carve geometric patterns by accident. That takes intent. I mean, whoever carved it had a shared mental map with whoever was looking at it.
Exactly. Those engraved ochres are hard evidence of symbolic intent.
Meaning they had a working memory that existed across generations.
And that shared meaning, that working memory, that is the very definition of a culture.
So the argument here is that humans were making tools, using complex symbols, and carrying generational memory long before the Ice Ages even ended.
Let alone before today's political categories were invented.
To explain how humans move through time with this culture, the author uses this brilliant analogy. They call out the idea of naked NPCs.
Yes, this is a great analogy. For the listener, if you don't play video games, an NPC is a non-player character.
Right, they just spawn into the digital world out of thin air. They stand in a village with no past, no memory, no luggage, just waiting to say their one line of dialogue when the main character walks by.
And the text argues that human beings absolutely do not spawn into history like that.
No. When ancient humans migrated out of Africa and trekked across the Eurasian landmass, they weren't walking around empty-handed. Their metaphorical backpacks were completely full.
Consider what was actually in those backpacks. They carried fire. They carried highly sophisticated tool-making techniques.
They carried language structures. Right?
Language, complex marriage patterns, foodways, and profound rituals for grief and burial.
So they were carrying 200,000 years of human development before they even hit Europe or Asia.
Which disrupts the modern narrative of cultural appropriation at a fundamental level.
Because if culture is ancient, and if it is inherently migratory,
and if every human group has been carrying and adding to their cultural backpack for tens of thousands of years,
then nobody gets to draw a line in the sand at the year 1500 or 1776 or 2024 and pretend that culture began exactly when their preferred label was coined.
Exactly.
So, okay, if my ancestors walked out of Africa, trekked across Eurasia for 40,000 years, and eventually got on a boat to America, they brought a massive, dense cultural inheritance with them.
They absolutely did.
But if everyone is walking around with these heavy, ancient cultural backpacks, they are inevitably going to bump into each other. You can't have global migration without collision.
Right. Geography is finite.
And the author actually lays out a specific mathematical formula to describe this collision in the context of the United States.
They call it Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3.
Let's walk through this math because it's fascinating.
So the formula functions as a structural map of national formation. Group 1 represents indigenous America.
And they bring with them Culture 1.
Right. Culture 1 is their own deep time backpack. It holds their survival techniques, their sacred geography, and their civilizational forms.
Okay, got it. Then you have Group 2.
Group 2 represents the Eurasian or European migratory settler line.
And obviously they bring Culture 2.
Yes, which is their own ancient backpack containing varied languages, legal structures, religious traditions, and agricultural methods.
So when Group 1 and Group 2 meet on the same continent, they form Group 3.
Which is the United States.
And the United States operates with a shared Culture 3.
Exactly.
Now, on paper, calling it math makes it sound very clean. You know, Group 1 plus Group 2 equals Group 3, boom, done.
But the author does not hide behind the math. Not at all.
No, the text explicitly lists out the terrifying, messy reality of what actually happens when those two ancient backpacks collide.
It provides a very visceral catalog of that collision. It explicitly lists conquest, violence, and sin. It lists blood and conflict.
But it doesn't stop there.
No, it also lists trade, covenant, intermarriage, law, mercy, and survival.
So the author is basically demanding that we look at the totality of the interaction.
Right. History is not sterile. The creation of a new civil body is born from both massive triumph and massive tragedy.
Because over centuries, Group 1 and Group 2 don't just stay sealed in their own separate Tupperware containers. They bleed into each other.
They form entirely new family lines. They form a completely new legal order. They forge Group 3.
And crucially, the author stresses that this new shared culture, Culture 3, does not erase the original cultures.
Right. Group 1 and Group 2 remain permanently embedded within Group 3 as its constituent roots.
The text describes this as a root-to-fruit relationship, right?
Yes. The fruit does not deny the root, and the root doesn't just disappear because the fruit had ripened. They are inexorably linked.
Okay, hold on, though. I have to push back here on behalf of the listener. Because if you apply that logic to European settlement, aren't you essentially giving colonizers a free pass?
That is a very common objection.
Because people are going to read this and immediately say, wait a minute, European culture in this context is just colonizer culture. It's built on theft and displacement. You can't call that a shared house. Does the author just ignore that dissent?
Not at all. The text actually anticipates that exact objection.
So how do they respond?
The author argues that reducing the entire Eurasian migratory line to the single word colonizer is historically and philosophically reductive.
Reductive how?
Because it completely deletes the organic embedded formation of that shared Group 3. Did the Eurasian line bring violence and conquest? The text explicitly says yes, they did. But it also brought profound institutions, common law, architectural breakthroughs, and deep philosophical traditions, just as indigenous America brought equally profound realities.
Right.
So the United States is formed from the catastrophic and miraculous combination of both of those deep histories.
So the author is saying that if you just use the label colonizer, you are flattening out 50,000 years of human history into a two-dimensional political slogan.
Exactly. You erased the massive reality of what was actually built together, however painfully that building process happened.
Which leads directly to the text's central thesis regarding the modern concept of cultural appropriation.
Right. Think about Group 3 as a massive, shared national house.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It was built by the complex interactions of Group 1 and Group 2 over centuries. Therefore, Culture 3 is the shared culture of that specific house.
And so, if the descendants of the people who built that house participate in the culture of that house, it is inheritance. It cannot be theft.
Precisely.
You can't steal the roof you were standing under if your ancestors helped nail the shingles to the rafters.
That is a very vivid way to articulate the text's logic.
Even if your ancestors were literally fighting the guys on the other side of the roof while they were doing it, the roof still belongs to both of you.
Exactly. Cultures borrow, blend, and adapt. That is not automatically a crime. That is just the historical mechanism of human movement and shared geography. If Culture 3 is the house that those groups built through their shared history, accusing someone within that house of appropriating the shared culture requires you to explain how the builders of a house somehow became thieves of their own living room.
That is such a wild reframing of the whole debate.
It really shifts the paradigm.
Okay, so if the United States is this massive, incredibly complicated shared house built through blood, trade, and time, someone has to lay down the house rules.
Naturally.
Historically, we've relied on the state to enforce those rules and keep the roof from caving in. But this text asks a dangerous question about the state.
A very dangerous question. Does the state actually own the house, or is it just the property manager?
Right. And to answer that, the author points directly to the civic spine of America.
Relying on two very specific foundational documents. First, the Declaration of Independence, specifically the phrases, all men are created equal, and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights.
And the second document.
The 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees the equal protection of the laws.
The author puts a massive amount of weight on the word creator in the Declaration. Why does that specific word matter so much to this argument?
Because it establishes an absolute sequence of authority. If human rights come from a creator, they fundamentally do not come from the state.
The state is downstream.
Entirely downstream of the source. The state can recognize rights, it can secure them, it can marshal armies to protect them, and as history repeatedly shows, it can violently violate them.
Right, but it can't create them.
Exactly. The state cannot author human worth. It cannot generate human dignity from its own bureaucracy.
It makes me think of the state as basically a librarian.
A librarian, that's an interesting analogy.
Think about it. A librarian is incredibly important to a functioning society. They categorize the books, they put them on the right shelves, they maintain the Dewey Decimal System.
They keep the order.
Right. And they will absolutely fine you if you disrupt the order of the library. They manage the entire system. But the librarian didn't write the books, they aren't the author.
That analogy captures the author's precise view of the government perfectly. The state manages the paperwork of society, it regulates the shelves, but it does not author the human being.
And to cement this idea, The text actually moves from constitutional law into a profound theological concept.
Yes, introducing the Hebrew word zera.
Let's really dig into zera, spelled Z-E-R-A. What is the historical and biblical context of this word, and how exactly does the author use it here?
So zera translates to seed, offspring, posterity, or living continuation. It is deeply rooted in the book of Genesis.
Like where specifically?
For example, in Genesis chapter 4, verse 25, after the murder of Abel, Eve says God has granted her another seed, another zera.
Oh, okay.
And even earlier, in Genesis 3, verse 20, Eve is named the mother of all living. The author leverages this ancient word to draw a sharp, uncompromising line between biological, generative life, which flows from a divine source, and mere cultural output or state bureaucracy.
So zera is the actual living lineage of humanity. It's not just the biological act of having kids, it's the ontological continuation of a people across time.
Right, it's the bloodline breathing through history.
Contrast that with culture, because culture can be curated, right?
Absolutely. You can manufacture a culture by assembling symbols, writing slogans, designing aesthetics, and mandating costumes. But zera must be received. It is a living, generative line.
And because of this, the state can never replace God.
Never. The state can classify populations, it can regulate borders, it can issue a birth certificate with a fancy official seal, but a birth certificate is just paper.
The state cannot create zera.
It cannot manufacture life.
But what happens when the librarian starts acting like the author? What happens when the state forgets its place, looks at the shelves, and starts to think it is the actual source of life?
Well, the author argues that this confusion becomes most damaging and most intensely personal in the realm of family and child custody.
This is where the essay shifts gears into a highly emotional critique of the foster care and adoption systems, right?
Yes. The text establishes a very strict taxonomy, separating family into 3 distinct categories.
Let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first is zera, which we just discussed, the biological birth or seed line.
Okay, and the second?
The second is adoption, which the text defines as legal family incorporation.
And the third?
The third is wardship. This is the custody line, operating under the legal doctrine of parens patria.
Okay, let's unpack parens patria for the listener. That essentially means the state acts as the ultimate parent of the child, right?
Yes, it is the legal doctrine granting the state authority to protect those who cannot protect themselves, like children in abusive or absent environments.
Which sounds good on paper.
On paper, the state uses gentle therapeutic language. They call it placement, or guardianship, or foster care. The state presents itself as a benevolent shield.
But the author violently contrasts that paper reality with the lived reality of a child actually trapped in the system.
Right. The state might call it guardianship, but to a child, wardship doesn't feel like mere protection. It feels like total state possession.
Because the mechanics of wardship are deeply bureaucratic.
Deeply. A child in the system experiences a life of continuous placement, forced transfers, constant supervision, clinical decision-making, and medical control.
They are just moved through a massive bureaucracy that they did not author and cannot escape.
The text argues that the state does not have to legally classify a child as property for the machinery of the state to function exactly like possession.
I can see a massive point of friction here, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you are saying birth is this divine zera and everything else is just legal machinery, doesn't this heavily insult adopted families?
That is a very valid concern.
Right, because if I'm an adoptive parent listening to this, it sounds like the text is saying my family isn't real, that it's just state-sponsored paperwork.
The author explicitly anticipates that emotional reaction, and they defend adoption fiercely, but they do it by focusing strictly on the mechanism of creation.
Explain that distinction.
The text states that adoption can be a holy duty. It can be real family, a profound covenant of love, and an act of absolute rescue. The author is not insulting the love or the bond within an adoptive family at all.
So what is the argument about that?
The argument is entirely about the mechanism of the state.
Okay, explain the difference in mechanism.
The state can legally incorporate a family. A judge can bang a gavel, sign a decree, move the paperwork from one desk to another and declare, "You are now legally a family."
And that is a vital legal function.
It is. But the state did not breathe that child into existence. The state did not generate the life it is placing.
Ah, it's about not confusing legal placement with divine sourced.
Exactly. Birth is the seed line zera. Adoption is legal incorporation, a covenant. Wardship is the custody line, state management.
These distinctions are critical because if a society blurs them, it begins to allow the state to act as if it is the creator of the family unit, rather than just the manager of its legal status.
And when the state believes it creates the family, it assumes total authority over it.
The state can move paperwork. God gives life. That is a sharp, undeniable line in this text.
It really is the core of the argument.
And the author argues that when the state forgets it isn't God in the realm of the family, that arrogance bleeds out.
Right. It doesn't just stay confined to family law.
The state starts forgetting its role in the culture at large. It starts thinking it can engineer society from the top down.
And that leads us directly to what the author calls the Trojan horse of protected classes.
Okay, brace yourselves, because this is perhaps the most politically explosive section of the entire essay.
We really need to look incredibly closely at how the author distinguishes between the valid shield of protection and the dangerous hierarchy of privilege.
Let's start with the basics. The text brings up legal concepts established in America, like protected classes under the EEOC, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, and federal hate crime laws involving bodily injury.
Right. And just to give you, the listener, a quick refresher on the law on paper, protected classes are categories like race, religion, sex, national origin, and disability.
The law dictates that you cannot discriminate against someone based on these traits in employment, housing, or public accommodation.
And the author is very clear on this point. Protecting people from unjust discrimination is a moral good.
It aligns perfectly with the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection.
Exactly. A legal shield against injustice is entirely valid. The catastrophe, according to the text, occurs when that shield of protection mutates into a hierarchy or cultural authority.
I mean, I can see the friction here. If you give one group a legal shield, human nature dictates that eventually someone is going to try to sharpen the edge of that shield and use it as a sword.
That is precisely the danger.
But how exactly does a shield mutate into a hierarchy? Does the text point to a specific moment or mechanism when that switch happens?
It happens when a protected class functionally receives cultural immunity, speech privilege, and the exclusive authority to accuse other classes of appropriation.
So the law might say equality on the parchment in Washington.
But the author asks us to look at the practical reality of social institutions, massive corporations, media conglomerates, and universities.
Give me an example of how that double standard plays out in reality.
The warning is this: observe how behavior is judged based entirely on the identity of the actor.
Okay.
If identical speech, symbols, aesthetic choices, or even jokes are treated as authentic culture or empowerment when one group does it, but the exact same conduct is treated as violence, hate, or appropriation when another group does it, then the governing rule is no longer equal protection.
Wow. The practical enforced rule is class status.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to the cultural math we talked about earlier. Remember Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3?
Yes, the shared house.
Right. Well, the author introduces a new variable here, the phenomenon of Group 4 and Culture 5.
Let's walk through this carefully, because this is where the caste system really takes shape.
Okay, so you have the shared American house, which is Culture 3. Then a later identity movement arises inside that house, called Group 4.
And Group 4 curates a new composite culture, Culture 5, by selecting bits and pieces of art, language, and grievance from the shared house.
And again, the author notes that curating a composite culture isn't inherently wrong, right? Human beings remix and adapt cultures all the time.
Right, the remixing isn't the issue. But the double standard solidifies when Culture 5, this newly curated, highly visible movement, gets institutional shielding from the state.
Like they get the protection of HR departments, diversity boards, and media platforms.
Yes. And then, protected by that massive institutional shield, they turn around and accuse the original roots, the historical builders of the shared house, of theft or appropriation.
It's like borrowing furniture from the shared living room, decorating your own private bedroom with it, locking the door, and then screaming that the people who built the house are stealing from you.
That is the exact asymmetry the author is targeting. The text calls this caste logic with nicer vocabulary.
Caste logic. That's a heavy phrase.
It is. If the state or corporate power acting as a proxy for the state protects one identity category so thoroughly that it grants that identity unequal authority over the shared national culture,
Hmm.
then the state has entirely inverted equality.
Because one class is granted a shield of absolute protection, while the other class is handed a muzzle of inherited guilt.
Exactly. And the text is very careful to state that this isn't an argument for cruelty. This isn't a defense of using slurs or degrading people.
Right, it's an argument about the fundamental definition of equality. Equal means equal.
If you weigh speech, art, or cultural participation differently depending purely on the demographic identity of the speaker, you do not have equality. You have a caste system managed by HR departments.
And this unequal cultural authority creates a massive, unsustainable imbalance in society.
It rewards curated cultural performance, the aesthetic output, while actively punishing and shaming the actual generative roots of the nation.
And this imbalance leads directly to what the text identifies as a fatal societal illness. The author calls it the input-output paradox.
Let's really define the terms of this paradox because it feels incredibly relevant to what we see happening in the world today.
Definitely. So the author divides societal energy into two distinct categories, input and output.
Let's start with input. Input equals zero. It is conception, birth, family formation, population replenishment. It is the actual physical living continuation of a people.
Okay, and output.
Output equals culture. It's the flags, the slogans, the public celebrations, the identity branding, the lanyards, the bureaucratic infrastructure.
And the paradox relies on this economic and biological concept called dependency throughput.
Yes. A healthy functioning nation requires both input and output. It needs historical memory, and it needs actual children to inherit that memory.
It needs civil rights, and it needs living people to exercise those rights.
But the author asks a terrifying question. What happens when a system becomes entirely obsessed with output, with cultural display, institutional power, and identity management, but it completely fails to produce its own generative zero?
Right, like think about the corporate emails you get or the commercials you watch.
Ask yourself, are you looking at actual generative input, something that builds the future, or are you just looking at sterile output, desperately trying to justify its own existence?
I keep coming back to a tech company analogy to visualize this.
Let's hear it.
Imagine a massive tech corporation that spends billions of dollars on output. They have the best marketing team on earth, incredible branding, beautiful corporate retreats, huge PR campaigns celebrating their own corporate culture.
Okay, sounds like a lot of companies.
Right, but behind the scenes, they've completely stopped manufacturing actual computers. They just stopped building the hardware entirely.
So what happens to that company?
Well, for a while, they can survive on the hype. They can coast on the branding. They can even buy up smaller companies to maintain the illusion of growth. But eventually, because there is no new input, no new actual product being generated, the company will consume itself. The marketing department will literally run out of things to market.
That is a highly accurate parallel to dependency throughput.
Yeah.
If a cultural system, like the curated culture 5 we discussed earlier, does not produce its own zero through its defining mechanism, it cannot replenish itself from within.
Because a purely ideological or curated identity movement does not inherently produce biological life.
Exactly. Therefore, it must survive by recruiting, reclassifying, or using immense institutional pressure to pull life from the outside.
It has to siphon it from the biological generative lines of groups 1, 2, and 3.
It has to feed on the very roots it is simultaneously shaming and accusing. It's a cultural parasite.
And the author offers a chilling mathematical warning here.
Yes. If a nation protects a non-generative output culture, while simultaneously weakening, shaming, or accusing the generative root cultures of inherited liability, the state is no longer protecting its future.
It is actively consuming its own foundation.
The logic is unavoidable. No zero input plus protected cultural output equals the end of the line.
Just give me a second to wrap my head around that. No zero, no people, no nation.
It's a chillingly simple equation.
But the implications are absolutely terrifying if you look at modern global birth rates. We have societies obsessed with managing identity labels, obsessed with the paperwork of equality, but the actual generative family formation is collapsing.
We are idolizing the paperwork while forgetting how to generate the life the paperwork is supposed to manage.
It is a sterile nation consuming its own seed.
It is a profound demographic and philosophical critique. But to truly grasp the absolute weight of this input versus output argument, we have to transition into the final and undoubtedly the most complex section of the text.
We have to look at the secret operating system running beneath this entire essay.
Yes.
The text includes a final section called the key legend. And let me tell you, when I first read this part, I was completely thrown.
It is a massive shift in tone.
It really is. It felt like the essay suddenly shifted from political philosophy into a quantum physics textbook written by an ancient Hebrew theologian. We go from discussing EEOC policies directly into a deep dive on cosmic physics, the speed of light, and the nature of reality.
But the author asserts that this key legend is not a side note or a whimsical metaphor. It is the foundational operating system of the entire argument.
Because without it, you might mistake the essay as merely a political complaint about social issues or legal double standards.
Right, but the argument begins much deeper, with the nature of the universe itself. The governing confession of the text is this: God is life, God is light, life is spirit, light is field.
Let's break that down because it's really dense. The universe is the parametered manifestation of the field. What does that actually mean for the listener who hasn't taken a physics class in 20 years?
It means the universe is not just a dead, random pile of chaotic matter bouncing around in a void. It is a deeply lawful order.
Okay.
The field manifests reality by filling parameters. Parameters are measurable boundaries, the laws of physics, the constants of nature.
And the author focuses intensely on the word universe, right? Breaking it down into one verse.
Yes. A verse is measured speech. It has rhythm, meter, and boundary. It is a song, not random static noise.
The universe is a measured song that connects beautifully to the biblical psalms, which the author brings up, describing them as liturgical, juridical song.
It's sung law and sung witness. Creation isn't just meaningless matter. It's a physical record that testifies to its source.
And the physical element that makes this continuous record possible, the medium of the universe's memory, is light.
To explain this, the author invokes Albert Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared.
Okay, slow down here. Explain the mechanism of E equals mc squared in this specific philosophical context. How does relativity connect to theology?
E equals mc squared proves that mass and energy are not two separate sealed-off realities. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared.
So matter, the physical stuff of the universe, including our bodies, is simply energy held in a measurable, parameterized form.
Exactly. And the measure of that relationship, the constant that binds reality together, is the speed of light.
So light is not just decorative brightness.
No, it is the ultimate field expression. It records relationships. It makes reality visible and intelligible across time and space.
Which brings us to the rainbows.
Yes, the rainbows.
The text spends a significant amount of time talking about the visible rainbow, RYG by V. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. 7 colors.
But the author insists it's not just a pretty optical illusion in the sky. The text describes the rainbow as an observer relative geometry.
Explain that, because I had to read that part twice.
Think about the physics of a rainbow. When sunlight hits water droplets in the air, the light refracts, separating into the visible spectrum. But a rainbow only appears as a perfect arc because of where your specific eye is located relative to the light source in the water.
So if you and I are standing 50 feet apart, we are actually seeing 2 completely different rainbows.
Exactly. You are the geometric center of the specific light cone, making that rainbow visible to you.
So the rainbow is literally pointing at the observer. It's a geometric relationship between the source of light and the human eye.
Yes. Symbolically and theologically, the author notes that the number 7, the 7 colors of the full spectrum, represents fullness, completion, and a covenant witness from the Creator.
7 is the complete palette of the source.
While 6, however, is deeply symbolic in ancient traditions as the number of man, it represents man's uncompleted register.
The human-centered palette. So what happens if a society deliberately adopts a 6-color symbol, severing the 7th color?
The author argues that when a society adopts a 6-fold symbol, it symbolically represents a collapse inward.
Why inward?
Because the uncompleted register curates color into identity branding. It points to itself. It worships its own output, rather than pointing outward to the completed 7-fold covenant of the source.
Oh, wow.
It becomes a closed loop of human narcissism output pretending to be input.
And then we zoom out from a rainbow in the sky to the deepest reaches of deep space. Redshift. For anyone who needs a quick astrophysics refresher, redshift is the Doppler effect applied to light. It is how we know the universe is expanding.
Give us the ambulance analogy.
Right. Imagine an ambulance driving away from you. The siren's pitch drops because the sound waves get stretched out. The same thing happens with light.
Exactly.
When a distant galaxy moves away from us at high speeds, the light waves it emits get stretched out. Because red light has a longer wavelength, the ancient light from that galaxy shifts toward the red end of the spectrum.
And the text describes this redshift as light carrying the receipt of relation.
It is the ultimate receipt. Because the universe is expanding uniformly, every point in the universe sees distant objects redshifting away from it.
That means every single human being on Earth stands at a local center of cosmic witness. The author calls the human being an inverse light cone, essentially an inverse rainbow.
Wait, slow down. Inverse light cone. Picture a flashlight shining at a wall that's a normal cone of light expanding outward. Are you saying the human eye is the wall, and the entire history of the universe is the flashlight shining into us?
That is a brilliant way to visualize it, yes. The light of the universe, carrying the historical record of stars and galaxies from billions of years ago, comes inward to you.
Your eye receives it.
Your mind remembers it. In the human being, memory becomes word, and word becomes culture. We are the receivers of the field's parameterized light.
Okay, I have to take a breath here. We have gone from 100,000-year-old carved ochre in African caves to American constitutional law, to HR diversity policies, to inverse light cones receiving the history of the cosmos.
It's quite the journey.
How does this astrophysics lesson tie back to the political argument about the state?
If we connect this cosmic physics to the bigger picture, the logic is stunningly, terrifyingly consistent. Nature, the physical universe of light, mass, and redshift, is the lawful life order of this divine field.
Okay.
Zero biological, living generation flows directly downstream from this divine source, governed by the parameters of nature, to humanity. Therefore, the state exists infinitely downstream of nature.
The state does not exist above it.
Never.
The state is just managing the paperwork at the bottom of a cosmic waterfall. It didn't create the water, it doesn't control the gravity, and it certainly didn't invent the light.
Precisely. The state absolutely cannot manufacture life.
And when the state tries to act as the source of truth, when it elevates its own sterile cultural output, its identity classifications, and its custody paperwork above the generative biological zera of humanity,
it is not just violating the U.S. Constitution. It is fighting the very physics of the universe. It is worshiping its own registry.
there is one more crucial piece to this natural biological order that we need to touch on before we finish. The text deeply discusses the role of the woman and the concept of Ra.
Yes, this is essential.
The author says the woman is the living gate through which zero becomes visible generation. And they redefine the ancient word Ra. Usually we translate Ra as evil or badness, but the author says it isn't some magic black dust floating in the universe. Ra is consequence.
Yes, Ra is the inevitable consequence of a violated order.
Like stepping off a cliff, right?
Exactly. If you step off a cliff, gravity isn't evil, gravity is a parameter. Hitting the ground is the consequence, the Ra, of violating the parameter of gravity.
So how does this apply to the woman?
The text argues that the woman's role in bearing Zera is a weighty ontological office of life-bearing. It is deeply, fundamentally tied to this cosmic order.
It is not just a biological mechanism that the state can manage, replicate, or redefine with a new legal term. The womb is not a bureaucracy.
Motherhood is not a corporate brand. It is the living office of generation.
To diminish that office, or to assume the state can replace it through custody frameworks or legal incorporation, is a profound violation of the natural parameter.
And violating the parameters of life always brings Ra. It always brings consequence.
That is heavy. It's a view of life that demands an incredible amount of reverence and humility.
It truly does.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with 100,000-year-old carved ochre in South Africa, tracing the heavy backpacks of deep-time human migration.
We looked at the brutal, messy, beautiful collision of cultures that built the shared American house.
We examined the limits of state paperwork. The librarian desperately trying to play the author. We navigated the treacherous waters of protected classes and the danger of giving one curated group unequal cultural authority over the generative roots.
We stared down the input-output paradox, the sterile tech company of a nation consuming its own seed.
And finally, we rode a beam of redshifted light all the way back to the divine source of life itself.
It is an overwhelming synthesis of ideas. And as we conclude, I want to address you, the listener,
Yeah,
directly.
this is for you.
This text asks you to fundamentally reconsider the structure of the world around you. The next time you hear a furious accusation of cultural appropriation online, or the next time you see the state creating new identity categories and acting as if a legal definition is the exact same thing as biological reality, ask yourself a question.
Is this an argument about protecting human dignity from injustice? Or is it a fight for unequal cultural authority?
Are we prioritizing the sterile, manageable paperwork of society over the actual messy, divine generation of life?
That is the essential question you have to ask when you look at the blueprint of any society. Does the system generate life, or does it merely manage decline?
And I believe you have one final thought for us today.
I do. I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over. Something inspired by the logic of this text, but looking toward our immediate future.
Let's hear it.
If this author is right, that a system obsessed with output, but lacking generative zero input, is mathematically doomed to end, what does this mean for our current societal rush toward artificial intelligence and virtual reality?
Oh, wow. That is a profound and slightly terrifying application of the input-output paradox.
Think about the mechanics of it. If a society decides to upload its entire culture, all of its art, its flags, its slogans, its history, and its memory, into a digital metaverse,
Right.
but that exact same society stops having children in the physical, real world, is that the ultimate manifestation of sterile output?
That is chilling.
Can a purely digital archive managed by an AI librarian ever truly inherit the shared house? Or is it just the digital ghost of a nation that worshipped its own parameters and forgot its source?
You can't build a living house with virtual blueprints.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us on this intense intellectual deep dive. Keep asking the big questions, keep examining the roots beneath the fruit, and we will see you next time.